So welcome and thank you for joining me today. It's lovely to see you all here. I'm Emma Burton, a nutritional therapist, and I work alongside Nuzest's education team. We are at stand 41, so if you'd like to continue this conversation afterwards, we would love to see you there. We have lots of free samples to give away by the end of today, and we're all a really friendly bunch, so please come along and have a chat with us. Before I get into any theory, I would just like to start this presentation with a few questions to get the juices flowing. So if two separate protein powders both contain 20 grams of protein, are they actually equivalent? I can see some heads going. It depends, yeah. So if you were just looking at the two nutritional labels, you might say yes. Yeah, same input, same output. But rarely in this industry are things that simple. We have to look a little bit deeper. So the amount of protein in a protein powder does tell us about the concentration or the density of protein, but what it doesn't tell us is about the additive load, the formulation quality, the biological value, and digestibility. Which leads me to the next question. So how many of us routinely check the ingredients in protein powders as carefully as we check the protein content? So I think sometimes we can just look at the macro, in this case the protein, but actually the formulation tells us a whole lot more. And that's where I think it becomes a whole lot more interesting. If we zoom out even further, at what point does a protein powder stop becoming a health supportive product and start becoming an ultra processed food? And there's no fixed line here, but the product you're looking at might behave like a high quality food supplement, or it might behave more like an ultra processed food with a high additive load. If we zoom out even further, would you still recommend a protein powder if the protein itself was the least concerning ingredient, or maybe the most known ingredient in the formulation? And this is where we can look at the importance of excipients and additives like anti-caking agents, preservatives, sweeteners, different types of flavors. And none of these are really inherently bad, but they do absolutely change the way a protein behaves biologically. So we need to look at this from a clinical perspective. So over the next 25 minutes or so, I hope to unpack all of this for you. We're going to look at the different types of protein, what additives can be included in a protein powder with some research, the differences in formulation, how contaminants become part of the picture through the processing of protein powders, and how we can test for those. And then when it comes to digestibility scoring, why older scoring systems like the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score is outdated, and we'll talk about what's replaced that, and the limitations of scoring as well. Okay. So the protein landscape, when we think of protein powders, sometimes we can default to just simply animal versus plant based proteins. This is not an exhaustive list of all the protein sources and types out there. But on the left, you will see animal-based proteins, and then we have plant source, and then on the right side is emerging proteins, like insect, which I think is an interesting one. I particularly like a cricket bar. I don't know if you've ever tried those. So when we come to think about what's added to those sources, we're looking at, as I said before, anti-caking agents, emulsifiers, preservatives. So when you take a protein source it's extracted. Sometimes it's isolated, sometimes it's not. In that case, it's called a concentrate. And then when the protein becomes a powder for sale, it's sometimes not a single ingredient anymore. Some of these additives are included. And these are primarily added for their functionality. So they might extend shelf life. They might improve mixability or flowability. They may improve palatability. They are all functional by design. So when we think of gums, we have some examples there: guar gum, xanthan gum, carrageenan, and these create a milkshake-like texture when the powder's mixed with the sauce, with a liquid of choice. Then we have emulsifiers like soy and sunflower lecithin, and these improve mixability. Sweeteners like stevia or the sugar alcohol family, which is xylitol, mannitol, erythritol, and many more. And they're there to improve palatability. Anti-caking agents, the most common one I've found is silicon dioxide, and that improves. Silicon dioxide is an anti-caking agent. Anti-caking, yeah. So it's there to prevent clumping, the flowability, yeah. And then when it comes to flavors, we have natural and artificial flavors. They're there to either improve taste, or they might be there to mask a bitterness that can sometimes come about through the processing of a product. And then preservatives, potassium sorbate and sodium benzoate. They are included to improve shelf life, make it last a bit longer. From a regulatory perspective, none of these, as I said, are inherently bad within certain amounts, but from a clinical perspective, we need to be thinking about tolerability. And that, of course, varies from individual to individual. So there is an emerging evidence base around additives. It's particularly emerging with human studies, but there are some key sort of themes that have come out of that. One is that additives can alter the microbiome. They can cause digestive upset. They can also spike blood sugar regulation. So in the case of sweeteners, we need to be a little bit careful there. But I'd like to zone in on just a couple that stood out to me when I was doing some research for this presentation. So sugar alcohols, the polyols. The P is the P in FODMAP, so you might know it as that. That's our erythritol, mannitol, xylitol family. These can be found in keto-based products, low sugar, carb alternatives. And the issue with these is that when they enter the gut, they cause an osmotic effect. That then leads to fermentation, which can then cause bloating and gas. The effects, of course, are dose dependent, and some individuals might not be affected at all by this. Carrageenan, so that's an anti-caking agent added to make that milkshake-like texture. It's a seaweed, and there is still limited human research on this, but there's other mechanistic and animal studies which suggests that this can cause digestive upset. There was a really small study with 12 participants with ulcerative colitis, and the findings suggested that it caused a digestive upset, dysbiosis, with those who already had some level of sensitivity. Also, the animal studies suggest that it can activate inflammatory pathways, particularly NF-kappa B, interleukin 8, and TLR4. And then finally, so this is probably one of the more studied additives out there, it can alter the gut microbiome, particularly reducing populations of lactobacillus and proteobacteria, and it can alter Akkermansia. So we just have to be a bit careful. But I would say that we still need large-scale human studies to really take any firm conclusions, but I think it's interesting that it's emerging, it's coming. What else might we find in a protein powder? So heavy metals is the most studied contaminant category in protein powders. It is mentioned in consumer testing reports in the US and the FDA total diet study, which looks at trace contaminants found in food and food products. There are also multiple independent analyses that detect measurable levels of heavy metals in protein powders. This varies from brand to brand, of course, but this is where manufacturing controls are so important to test the level of heavy metals. From a clinical perspective, it's not just about the heavy metals included in protein powders, it's also about the cumulative effect of those who are ingesting protein powders, maybe on a daily basis or more than once a day, like elite athletes, for example. Just considering that. Microbial contamination comes about due to manufacturing and hygiene and storage conditions. And in regulated facilities, this is not a problem, and it's always tested, and we're going to discuss this more in a moment. Mycotoxins, these are naturally occurring compounds that come about from certain molds pre-harvest. So this is particularly relevant for plant-based proteins. Common examples of these are alpha toxins and ochratoxin A. And again, these are monitored in food standard regulations. Mycotoxin exposure isn't a particular protein powder issue, it's more of a food chain issue. But it does, of course, come into the plant powder market. And so it's really important, again, that manufacturing controls are there and the QC testing is in place to make sure that this isn't an issue. And then processing contaminants, these come about due to the processing of the product, which might be heat, or it might be refining the product, or drying of a product. A couple of examples are heat-formed compounds that come about due to heat, and that can create a bitterness in the taste. And then oxidation byproducts from dairy processing. So for the more animal-based protein powders. So when we're evaluating a protein powder, we're not just evaluating that the animal versus plant, that sort of argument. We're also looking at the agricultural sourcing of it, the hygiene, the manufacturing, the traceability back to source, and the transparency of all of that. So how are protein powders tested for safety? If we think of the journey a product takes from being in its raw source to the finished product, it starts as that raw material. So at Nuzest, we use European golden peas. And at that point, it's tested for heavy metals, other contaminants, and allergens. Ideally, manufacturers are working to GMP certified standards, good manufacturing practice, so always worth looking out for that on their websites. And this is a best practice framework which looks at batch consistency, traceability, sourcing and hygiene. And then some brands go one step further than that, and they have third-party testing just to make sure that all of the checkpoints are there to make sure the quality is high. Other brands also go one step further than that and look at protein verification, which just means that What we state on the nutrition label is what is actually included in the product. If we use Nuzest as a case study, we operate to GMP standards. We use an ISO 17025 lab, which means that it's independently accredited and verified. This testing ensures that the raw material is tested as well as the finished product. We also run positive release, which is that no product leaves the lab without meeting specification. The results are then documented on a certificate of analysis, and I'll show you one in a moment. And this states traceability and verification of all of the testing. But we know that no testing guarantees zero risk, of course, but the more robust these testing procedures are in place, the better. And I think that's what gives us confidence in particular brands and products over others, ensuring that this is all in place. So here's an example of a certificate of analysis. It's probably quite small for you to read. I just wanted to put it out there so you could see what one might look like. Okay. So testing tells us whether a product is safe and compliant, but what it doesn't tell us is if that product is clinically optimal for our clients, for ourselves and our clients. So there are a few other lenses that we can consider. So amino acid completeness. We know that animal-based proteins are more complete. But I would say that completeness doesn't necessarily mean superiority. Rice and lysine, for example, are lower in some of the essential amino acids. Rice being lower in lysine and pea is lower in methionine. They are sometimes combined to create more of a fuller amino acid profile. Leucine content, so that's looking at the MPS trigger. So leucine is a signaling amino acid and it triggers muscle protein synthesis via the mTOR pathway. And this is relevant for those clients that are doing resistance training or want to maintain or build muscle mass. So that might be important to that individual you have in front of you in clinic. Digestibility, survival of the fittest. So how much of that protein powder is actually absorbed in the body? And we'll come on to the scoring in a moment. In terms of speed of digestion, they really vary. So we know that whey protein is rapidly absorbed. Casein has a slow and sustained absorption rate, and plant proteins really vary depending on the processing. At Nuzest, we use a clean water-based processing method, which extracts the isolate but keeps it intact, which then in turn improves the digestibility. So if we look at the different types of proteins, if you will, we've got concentrates, isolates, and hydrolysates. And the processing for these are quite different. So concentrates are more in their original form, lightly filtered, the original food source is minimally refined, and so it has more of the bioactive compounds. Isolates are more filtered. We use that filtering process to remove carbs, starch, and anti-nutrients. Hydrolysates are highly processed, often enzymatically, and that can create a bitterness. This is done through hydrolysis to break it down into smaller peptide chains, and they're known as pre-digested proteins. The protein levels vary, of course. We've touched on taste. Absorption speeds also vary, but concentrates are generally slower because they're more in their complete form, whereas hydrolysates, they're pre-digested, so they're quicker. Thank you. And The clinical uses, there's of course more clinical uses for these different types of proteins, but just some examples. The hydrolysates are helpful for faster gastric emptying, so for those who need that, and for quick uptake in elite recovery. So the ones on the right are more sort of functional based. So when it comes to scoring, both of these systems look at the digestibility of protein powders, and they were both developed to standardize this across the market. But they look at slightly different things. So the older system is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score. The newer system is the digestible indispensable amino acid score. If we start with the older system, so this was developed in the early 1990s by the Food and Agriculture Organization. And this was, at that time, a major improvement on the systems that came before it. It looks at how much protein is digested through the whole of the digestive tract by comparing nitrogen intake with nitrogen excretion. And still, this is the regulatory standard. Oh, we've gone too far. This is the regulatory standard today. So if there was ever an issue, like a dispute between a consumer and a brand, then legal teams would look at this system for the scoring. Hopefully that will change to the newer system as that gains more traction. Keeps going there. It's not a useless tool, but I think it's just limited, and we have moved on. It's particularly limited though when we look at isolated plant proteins, and you'll see why in a moment. So one of the problems with the PDCAAS is that it's kind of like a threshold. When a protein powder meets that threshold, it is deemed to be adequate. For example, whey protein and casein score the same with this system, but they behave quite differently in the body. It also looks at total tract digestion, and the problem with that is that particularly plant proteins, by the time they're excreted, the gut microbiome might have altered them. So it doesn't necessarily show what is digested in the small intestine and then utilized by the body. And then there is a little bit of a bias here. So this system does favor animal-based proteins. It's also not reflective of modern day processing, which can improve digestibility. So this is where the conversation around the DIAAS began, because scientists were looking for a little bit more of an accurate way to score these products. So it was developed following consultations coordinated by the Food and Agriculture Organization in 2011. And it measures how effective a protein powder can supply each of the 9 amino acids. And then the lowest score is declared. One of the big differences is that it looks at amino acid absorption at the end of the small intestine, so before the matter enters the large intestine. And it evaluates all 9 essential amino acids rather than just the other system was just 1 overall score. So it's a little bit more specific. And that is relevant with plant proteins because we know that they don't necessarily deliver all of them. So it's good to be transparent about that. Since 2013, the Food and Agriculture Organization have formally recommended this system because they believe it shows a much clearer picture of digestibility. And that transparency is welcomed when we have to declare amino acid levels on nutrition labels, and also when regulatory scrutiny is at an all-time high between consumers and brands. This is particularly relevant for plant proteins, because when you isolate a plant protein, we remove the fiber, the starch and anti-nutrients, and that increases the amino acid density, so it improves the amount of protein in the product, improves digestibility, and it improves the scores. And so we just want to be really transparent about that. Okay. But all testing, and neither system is perfect and neither tells us the whole story. We need to also account for food processing, the additives, contaminants that might be in that product, and then of course that individual that you have in clinic and their varying dietary needs and context. Okay, so here's just a little sort of in conclusion, looking at both of those different systems. I'll give you a moment to take some photos. But all testing happens in labs, right? So we're not testing individuals in the real world. And so I think that this can inform our thinking, but it shouldn't replace it. It's just a part of the picture. So in terms of thinking about protein powders differently, we can look through these 4 domains or lenses to make our own conclusions about what is best for our clients. So this is designed as a bit of a checklist, looking at protein quality, whether leucine is important for your clients or not, digestibility, what type of protein is it, a concentrate, isolate, or hydrolysate? And then, are the manufacturing and testing procedures in place for the brands that you are looking at? Are they GMP certified? Do they run third-party testing, a heavy metal and microbiological screening? Do they have a certificate of analysis? And then ingredient transparency, making sure that all ingredients are disclosed on the nutrition label. And then tolerability. So what might be appropriate for one client might be very different to another. As we all know, we all vary hugely. Ultimately, there's no perfect protein powder. It is the best one for you and your clients, their sensitivities, microbial composition, and their overall health status, of course. So one of the key messages I hope to leave you with is that we need to look beyond the protein grammage amount. Okay, thank you. And we can use that checklist. I might leave that up there actually if I can. And we can use this as a bit of a checklist to evaluate. And that's it. So thank you for bearing with me. Again, we're at stand 41, so please come along. I'm aware I've got 1 minute left, so probably not a huge amount of time for questions, but I will be at stand 41. So come along, have a chat, get some samples, and thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.